Hello, and welcome to the Art of Teaching the Whole Child in a Pandemic, Cultivating Trauma-Sensitive Practices for Resilience. This is Module 3P, Cultivating Predictability by Finding Voice. So at this point, you are in January. Finding voice is part of 4 habits that you want to stick this year. And choice pits and peaks, you're now diving into week 2, where you're going to look at the practice of voice to give students increased predictability so that you can link with them this year. Because as a reminder, I'm sure you're well aware, we're still in the middle of this pandemic and it's causing increased levels of unpredictability due to those shifts in learning models, the disrupted access to school. So any nugget of predictability can help us all. Because it's right now, it's really impacting our sense of stability. But the fact is that research shows us a number of ways that we can use student voice to boost engagement in spite of this unpredictability that we're up against. And those, if we carve out those habits of getting students' voice activated, then that can really establish some level of predictability for them across any of our learning models, whether it's in person, hybrid, or remote, and helps us be resilient in the face of this to help students share the floor with them and learn from their peers. And so these are great tips and techniques that we're going to be sharing today that I'm eager to share with you that can help accomplish those goals for you this year. So the objectives of this is to learn some evidence-based student voice routines, to specify a new personalized voice habit to use, and to use your daily pulse to keep monitoring your habits and your wellness. So you're going to need about 20 minutes, some clear headspace, your printed or digital journal, which looks a little bit like this, so that you can do steps 4 through 6. Just as a recap, last time we talked about voice and choice pits, so that now you are choosing voice as something that you'd like to increase in your classroom. And we're going to talk about a number of routines that you can use as part of a habit plan to build more connection and predictability, but primarily predictability when it comes to this voice routine. So be thinking about which routine you want to choose and how that's going to correspond and fit into your habit plan. So I encourage you to watch and follow along with your guided notes to think through what you want as your habit. So moving from voice pits to peaks, what we're really talking about here is opportunities to respond. So this is a question, statement, or gesture that we make as an educator to get a student to respond. So it might be verbally answering a question or reading aloud, writing their answers to a problem, responding physically to a cue that we give to the students. And so there's a number of ways that we're getting students to respond and show us that they're following along, that they're understanding, that they're participating. And they have them all listed over here to the left. So we're trying to move from those pits of talking quite a bit or just calling on the volunteers on occasion, enhancing those to having more voice in the classroom to involve the rest of the students as well. So when we're trying to think about, which one you want to use, some things to keep in mind is that you want to keep your students engaged often, and you want to keep them engaged in different ways for your specific outcome. So what is it that you want them to remember? So we don't want to just kind of haphazardly use them, but kind of use them strategically in our classroom. And at the end of the day, it's your choice. But we do want, last time we talked about 70% of our opportunities to respond should be involving all students. And so these are great tools to think through which is the one that you want to use to increase the active engagement of all students. So the first one that we're going to talk about is co-responding. This involves all students verbally answering at the same time. So you might ask a question, put up your hands to indicate silence, and then give some thinking time to the students, about 3 or more seconds, and then lower hands as you say everyone. So it kind of puts you in the role of a choir director. And I love this video here of Miss Anita Archer showing us how she does this in her classroom. And you can tell it takes a little bit of a start here, but she gets there.
Raise their hands. So when I ask a question, are you going to raise your hands? Yes or no, everyone? No, unless I say, raise your hand. So everybody raise your hand. Then you can do that. But here's what we're going to do instead. When the answers are very short, we're going to say the answers together. I'll ask a question. I will put up my hands. This says think, do not blurt. And when I lower my hands right there, you'll say the answer. Got it? Okay, ooh, good job sitting up. So get ready. So everybody, what day of the week is it? Everyone, it's
November.
The day of the week is Friday. Oh, I can't believe you'd forget that. Let's try it again. So what day of the week is it? Think.
Friday.
Well, think. Everyone, Friday. Now let's practice that again. This is think. You don't say it until I lower my hands right there, okay? So what day of the week is it, everybody? It's
Friday.
all right. Of course, tomorrow it will be
Saturday.
I didn't fool you. After Saturday,
Sunday.
perfect. That gives everybody a chance to think. You are so good.
All right. So a few takeaways that I'm sure you noticed is that this is great for engaging review lessons. Like she said, very brief responses that she's getting from students. So she knows they all can answer it. But the con here is that it requires some practice at first. As you can see, she's teaching them how to do this. But look, within 1 minute of us watching that, all of those kids caught on to what this is and how this works. A pro tip that I would encourage you to think about is if students don't respond, to it, just repeat it. Like that first, when she said, what day of the week is it? And one student said, November. She just repeated it to get everyone actively involved. And so it's a great technique to activate everyone in the classroom. But some key things to think about that apply to the rest of the strategies, including the one we just reviewed, is that most of these are a little bit different. And so they require some teaching and practice. It's very important that we teach how to do these things. It's the first time a lot of students will have used them. Just like the first time you ever try anything new, it's important for someone to engage you in some teaching and some practice. And so the second point is that you're going to need to use some think time to be inclusive. Because if we don't give adequate think time, only your fast, most confident, English-speaking thinkers will be able to access these learning opportunities. So this sends the message, unfortunately, that the voice of the fastest students is valued and heard, and the rest aren't valued. But instead, if we give everyone think time, then it's important. It allows all of your learners to engage, especially right now with COVID has impacted a lot of our think time and our ability to think about our answers. And so it gives us, it's kind of an equal opportunity for them to engage. And we have to use it or they'll lose it. So it's important that whichever of these you're going to use, that you embed it in almost every day or every other day. If you go a week without using one of these, it's going to start to get rusty and it's going to start to be awkward. And so it's important that you continue to use them on a routine basis. All right, so the next one that we're going to talk about is spontaneous signals. So this is students' hand gestures for active listening to others. And so, when we have one student having the floor, we want to encourage all the other students to be actively listening. And we teach that often, but students don't necessarily see it in action. And so there's a great technique that we can use to promote that active listening with silent signals. So take a look at this video.
We call them silent signals, and students use them school-wide. So if you walk into any classroom at Think College now, you'll see students showing their agreement by going like this, their disagreement by going like this. If they're unsure, they show that they need clarification through this motion. This signifies volume. And this is what students do when another student is struggling with a question, to sort of encourage them to keep on going.
The first thing that I did was see any clue words.
How do you feel about that class? I'm seeing a lot of agreement. They're great data points for us as teachers, and also they really encourage our students to be metacognitive about their learning. What were those clue words that really just popped out at you?
Fewer. One word that I found was fewer.
This is a huge signal in upper grades, and it signifies that students need to speak in a complete sentence. So if a student starts a sentence with because, or just gives a one-word answer, the other students put this signal up to show that student they need to rephrase in a complete sentence.
How many?
What represents how many fish her dad has?
F. What represents how many her dad has is F.
I think that anytime that you can give students ownership over something, it's so much more meaningful to them. How do you feel about that class? showing their agreement, disagreement, need clarification, volume, keep on going, complete sentence.
All right. So a tip that I want to share after watching that video is that you only have to pick just one. You don't have to do all of them, but if you pick 2 to 3 of these, then you're really set to empower your students to learn and listen to each other, because anytime they can do this, you can model the listening. And that's the con that you have to keep an eye out for, like I mentioned before, is if you use it, you need to use it. If you don't, then they'll lose it. And those are your 2 options. And so you tell a few points in the video, she was modeling for them how to do this. And as soon as the teacher started, the rest of the students followed along. So a great technique to use any of these that are silently signaling to each other that we're listening to you. We're actively and predictably being a part of our classroom environment. The next one I want to share is fist of 5, which is a gestural response to a check for understanding. So a lot of times you're like wondering, you're doing your teacher talk and you're like, are they following me at all here? And so the idea here is you want to pivot to a fist of 5 at those moments where you're like not sure if they're following along. And the goal here is to ask students to rate their understanding of the content on a scale of fist to a 5. So I don't understand at all to I completely understand. And so you give them that 3-second countdown to think about that, and then have a synchronized response. And so at any point you can say, how well do you feel like you understand this content about this period in American history? And then you have students give a fist of 5 on that. And so it's a great tool to use at any time, pretty much. A con of this is that it's pretty subjective, you know? Many students might inflate their scores or deflate their scores compared to what they really what their true understanding of it is. And so it's not always exactly accurate, but it's a good glimpse into what their confidence is and their understanding. And it can be subjective to peer pressure, as you can imagine. A lot of students will even say, oh yeah, I'm a 5, when they're really not. So the pro tip that I want to share here is ask for closed eyes. So if students have that anonymity and they're closing their eyes, then they might be more honest with you. And so that's a great tool to use. Another way to include as many students as possible is to have a random selection. So this is answering where the answering student is drawn systematically at random. So rather than calling on a volunteer, you're going to pivot to say, I'm going to randomly select a student. So whether it's the classic popsicle sticks, or maybe use a die or something like that, but a way to systematically randomly select a student. And so for a single answer, you're asking the question and they're giving about 3 seconds of think time before you randomly pick a student. So I'm going to show this nice video here of this teacher using this in action with some playing cards, which is really a unique application.
Incorporating kids into the class who aren't participating is like the #1 thing. One of the first things I think about when I'm planning a lesson. In my classroom, each seat has a playing card in front of it, taped to the desk in front of it. And I have those same exact cards in my hand up at the front. Your circumference and area calculation, this will be 4 of diamonds. Let's go, Mr. Abuyan. It's okay if a student has their card call and they don't quite know the answer. They just can't say, I don't know. So they have to tell us where they're stuck, and then we can get someone to help out if they need it. The reason I use playing cards instead of just randomly say, Jake, answer the question, that seems like I'm out to get them, like it's a gotcha moment. We all remember that, like being called on and not knowing the answers, one of the worst feelings.
So I love this example here that he shares. Another spin on this that you can use is a AAA for listing or brainstorming. So if you know there's a lot of answers to a question you want to get and you want to pick one random student, that you use any location as a starting point, then you go around the horn, up and down the aisles, across the rows, etc., and allow a pass. And just tell that student, hey, we're going to come back to you, or when we get back around, you share what your favorite answer is from what you heard from everyone else. But the idea here is that we're keeping students alert because they always know they might be picked. But to his point, they don't feel like it's a gotcha moment. Like when you call on some students, they, even as much as you might claim that it was random, they're going to think, oh, you were out to get me. You're trying to prove that I wasn't paying attention or whatever. There's going to be this back and forth. And so when we are transparently picking them at random, that really helps clarify that, I'm genuinely being random right here. And it helps every student stay alert and predict that they could be actively involved in the learning. So it gives them increased sense of obligation to the classroom, and that's important. A con here, of course, is that peers will still tune out the picked student, right? So one student answers and it's like, okay, well now they're answering, I don't have to, like, dodge that bullet, right? But a pro tip that I would share if you see that happening is to have a follow-up draw for a second opinion, so that they know, oh, there's going to be a second draw sometimes, so I should still tune in and listen to the student who is answering right now. All right, so next one, response cards. Students use a card here to visually respond to a multiple choice question all at once. So if you have a multiple choice question that you want to propose to out to the classroom, this is a great tool to visually see where students are at and what their answers are. And so it's an excellent tool to kind of get a quick check for understanding on the classroom. They all raise their cards at the same time. So, as we've been mentioning, you ask the question, give them some think time, count down to show the cards at the same time. This little piece of paper here is a great example of how it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be colorful. You can have students write this out on a piece of paper at home and then hold it up to the camera and pick agree or disagree, yes or no. And so this can be a great tool to quickly get a pulse on where students are at, how they're responding, and check on their understanding. So the pro here is that you get a quick visual scan of the classroom. The con is that it requires some prep to anticipate, okay, what are my ABCD options? What is my question multiple choice of? But it's a great tool also to think about how we can use it as a launch pad, right? So we can have students pick a side and then start the discussion. So they've already picked a side, they're more likely to give you an answer to why they picked that answer once they've committed to it. So it's a great tool to get those discussions launched. And like I said, you can make it in 10 seconds at home. All right. Now, the final one I want to share with you is whiteboards and waterfall chats. So this is a reusable tool for all students to answer simultaneously to an open-ended question. So whether it's a whiteboard, looks like this, or a waterfall chat, there's two ways you can use this. And the pro being that this is open-ended and requires your eyes for a quick scan of the classroom. So let's take a look at how this can play out.
We'll have it. So I do want to show a quick video of what I think is some adorable kids being engaged, because we were just talking about that. So I just popped a video in. And so just take a few minutes of watching them.
There were 4 green bugs and 2 yellow bugs. How many bugs are there all together? Don't show me yet. Keep your whiteboards down. I want a picture and a number sentence. That means you're ready.
Well, I only have
1, 2, 3. Show me. Hold it still so I can take my picture.
Nice.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Go.
All right, so that's our whiteboard technique, and then let's take a look at the waterfall technique.
We're seeing a lot of in synchronous sessions, what we call waterfall chats, where you say to students, here's a question, here's a problem, here's a thought. Type your answer in the chat, but do not hit return, do not hit send, don't let anybody else see it yet. And then on the count of 3, you say waterfall, that's very common. Shh, and everybody returns at the same time. What that does for you as a teacher, as an instructor, is to say, the students cannot copy the first 2 students' responses, paste it in the chat, and trick you into believing they understand and that they participated. So what I tend to do is I type this, I say, when I say waterfall, I type start in the chat. Their answers follow, and then at some point I type stop. When I download the chat, I have a participation band. Here's where I told them to start. Here's where I told them to stop. And I can see in the chat who did it and who didn't do it.
So it's another great technique to get all students actively involved in an open-ended response. But of course, as I mentioned, it requires that quick eyes for a scan, so you can take a picture as she did in the first video with the whiteboards, or as Doug does, downloading all of those answers. So your next step is to commit to a strategy. You've seen all of the strategies here that I've shared with you, and I'm excited to find out what your choice is for your new voice strategy and when you're going to use it, what the reward is that you'll notice. So as some examples, you can think about, the times that you notice I'm mostly using teacher talk. I'm going to prompt students to share a fist of 5 so that I can get a pulse on students' confidence, their understanding, how well they're following. Maybe it's after you start a whole group discussion. You're going to remind students of the silent signals they can use of full sentence or agree or disagree, and have noticed that all students are being actively included and they're listening. Maybe it's when you're about to call for a volunteer. You're going to select a student at random instead and notice that all students are preparing to provide their answer. And that's a great technique. Maybe it's after you want the students to commit to a side before discussing. So you're going to use your response cards to pick true or false or agree or disagree, and notice that all students must engage to move forward in the discussion. Maybe it's when you want to ask an open-ended question. You're going to use whiteboards or waterfall chat online and quickly know who's understanding and who's not, and get that pulse on your classroom. Maybe it's when you're reviewing mastered content. You want to use corresponding prompts throughout the review, and so that all students are being actively included. There's a lot of ways you can do this. I encourage you to see your journal for more techniques and more cues and routines that you might match up for your setting in your classroom. Within a week, I'd encourage you to share your takeaway, what your habit plan is to make it stick, because that's the key, is making it stick. If you have questions about these habits or techniques and want to or have questions about the course at all, do not hesitate to reach out to me, but I look forward to hearing what your personalized habit plan is for integrating more voice into your classroom, sharing the microphone with all students, and spending less time doing teacher talk.